My stepfather offered to teach my 16-year-old daughter swimming. My wife said absolutely not. I thought she was being paranoid and overprotective. When I discovered what she'd been hiding from me about him, I realized her instincts had been protecting our family all along. It started as such an innocent conversation on a perfectly ordinary Sunday afternoon in late September. The kind of day where the autumn leaves in Riverside Heights were just beginning to turn golden, and there was still enough warmth in the air to make you forget that winter was coming. We were sitting around the polished oak dining table at my mother's house on Elmwood Drive, the same table where I'd eaten countless meals growing up, where I'd done homework while mom cooked dinner, where I'd announced my engagement to Natasha 7 years ago. My daughter Kaylee was slumped in her chair with that particular brand of teenage melodrama that only a 16-year-old can master, picking at her mashed potatoes with the kind of focused irritation that suggested the potatoes had personally wronged her. She'd been complaining for weeks, no, months, about how embarrassing it was that she couldn't swim properly. Most of her friends at Westfield Academy were either on the varsity swim team or at least confident enough in the water to not look like flailing starfish, but Kaylee would barely venture past the shallow end of any pool. "It's literally so embarrassing, Mom," she was saying for probably the 15th time that month, her voice carrying that exasperated tone that made it clear she thought the entire adult world was conspiring against her social life. Like, when we went to Ashley's pool party last weekend, I had to pretend I was just relaxing on the pool steps while everyone else was actually swimming and playing volleyball in the deep end. Ashley's little sister, who's like 12, can do a perfect dive, and I'm over here acting like 3 feet of water is the Mariana Trench. I tried not to smile. Kaylee had always been dramatic. She got that from me, according to Natasha. But lately, the drama had been cranked up to 11 about pretty much everything. Her social life, her grades, the fact that we lived in what she considered the boring part of town instead of downtown, near the trendy shops and cafes her friends frequented. "Honey, we've talked about this," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Swim lessons are expensive, and with college coming up in 2 years, we're trying to be smart about money. Maybe we can look into group lessons at the community center next summer when the prices go down." Kaylee groaned and flopped back in her chair like I'd just told her she'd have to walk to school barefoot through snow for the rest of her life. "Mom, that's like 10 months away, and group lessons at the community center are for little kids and old people doing water aerobics. I can't show up there with a bunch of 5-year-olds wearing floaties." My mother, Patricia, chuckled from her seat at the head of the table. At 62, she still had that elegant way about her that made every family dinner feel slightly more formal than it needed to be. She was wearing one of her signature cardigans, this one a soft lavender that matched her reading glasses, and her silver hair was perfectly styled, even though we were just having a casual family meal. "When I was your age," Mom said with that twinkle in her eye that usually preceded a story we'd all heard before, "we learned to swim by having our fathers throw us into the deep end of the local swimming hole and telling us to figure it out. Sink or swim, literally." "Patricia, please don't give her ideas," Natasha said, but she was smiling. My wife had been unusually quiet during dinner, which wasn't entirely unusual. She often got contemplative on Sundays, especially when we spent them at my mother's house. Natasha was naturally more introverted than the rest of us, preferring to listen and observe rather than dominate conversations. It was one of the things I'd fallen in love with when we first met at that coffee shop near the university 8 years ago. When everyone else was trying to be the loudest person in the room, Natasha was the one actually listening, actually thinking before she spoke. That's when my stepfather, Derek, looked up from his plate, where he'd been methodically cutting his roast beef into perfectly even pieces. Derek had always been precise about things like that. His food, his appearance, his schedule. Everything had its place and its proper order. He was wearing one of his weekend polo shirts, navy blue with tiny anchors embroidered on it, paired with khakis that still had a sharp crease, even though it was the end of the day. "You know," Derek said, setting down his knife and fork with deliberate care, "I used to be a swim instructor back in college. Back at Thornfield University, I worked at the campus recreation center. Must have taught hundreds of kids over 4 years. I could teach Kaylee if she's interested."
He gestured toward the sliding glass doors that led to their backyard, where the kidney-shaped pool sat gleaming blue in the late afternoon sun. "We've got that beautiful pool just sitting there unused most of the time. Shame to let it go to waste."
It seemed absolutely perfect. Derek had been part of our family for 8 years now, ever since he'd swept my mother off her feet at some charity gala downtown. He'd been patient with Kaylee since she was 8 years old, always remembering her birthday, showing up to her school plays and volleyball games, playing the role of supportive step-grandfather with genuine enthusiasm. He'd helped me paint my first apartment, had given me advice when I was struggling with career decisions, had been the steady, reliable presence that filled the gap left by my father's death when I was 19. Plus, private swim lessons were expensive. We looked into it, and even the most basic package at the local swim school was running close to $300. With Kaylee's college fund to think about and Natasha's recent hours cut at the marketing firm where she worked, every dollar mattered. The idea of free, personalized instruction from someone who actually knew what he was doing seemed like a gift from heaven. But then something happened that I'd never seen before, in all the years I'd known my wife. Natasha went completely still. I mean, completely. Fork halfway to her mouth, loaded with green beans that she'd been eating automatically while listening to our conversation. Her entire body seemed to freeze, like someone had just pressed a pause button on her life. The color drained from her face so quickly that for a second I thought she might be having some kind of medical emergency. I followed her gaze to Derek, who was still smiling that same encouraging smile, waiting for our response. But there was something in Natasha's expression that I'd never seen before. Something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "That's very kind of you, Derek," she said carefully, her voice so controlled it sounded almost robotic. She set her fork down with the kind of precision that suggested she was concentrating very hard on not dropping it. But absolutely not. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual background sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic from Maple Street, the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down seemed to disappear. Mom's hand paused halfway to her water glass. Kaylee's mouth fell open slightly, like she couldn't believe someone had just shot down her potential solution to the swimming problem. Derek's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but then it was back, maybe a little brighter than before. "Oh, of course, I understand completely. You probably want to find a certified instructor, someone with proper credentials. Makes perfect sense." But Natasha shook her head. "No, it's not about credentials." "Natasha, what's wrong?" I asked, genuinely confused. My wife was many things, cautious, thoughtful, sometimes overly protective, but she wasn't usually rude. And shutting down Derek's offer so bluntly, especially in front of the whole family, seemed completely out of character. "It's just swimming lessons. Derek's practically family." She looked at me with these eyes I'd never seen before. Not angry, not upset, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like fear. No, not fear exactly. Something more complex. Like she was seeing something the rest of us couldn't see. Hearing a conversation we weren't part of. "We'll figure something else out," she said firmly, her voice carrying a finality that surprised everyone at the table. But not that. The words hung in the air like smoke. I could see Mom trying to process what was happening, her eyebrows drawn together in that way that meant she was trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. Kaylee looked like she wanted to argue, but wasn't sure who to argue with, or about what. Derek just shrugged, his smile never wavering. He said, "No pressure at all, just thought I'd offer. Family helping family, you know?" But I caught it. Just for a split second, something flickered across his face. Something that didn't match the smile or the casual tone or the easy shrug. It was there and gone so quickly that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. "Maybe," said Mom, clearly trying to smooth over the awkwardness, "we could all go to the community center together, make it a family activity. I've been thinking about getting back into swimming myself. My doctor says it's good for my arthritis." "That sounds lovely, Patricia," Natasha said, and her voice was back to normal. Warm, genuine, like the past 5 minutes hadn't happened. "We should definitely look into that." But I noticed she kept her eyes on her plate for the rest of dinner.
And I noticed how she positioned herself so that Derek wasn't in her direct line of sight. And I definitely noticed how when we were all saying goodbye in the front hallway an hour later, she made sure I was between her and Derek when he went in for his usual goodbye hug. The drive home was quiet. Kaylee had put in her earbuds and was presumably texting her friends about how unfair her life was. Natasha stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood roll by. The tree-lined avenues with their mix of 1960s ranch homes and newer colonial revivals, the corner market where we bought milk when we ran out, the small park where Kaylee used to play when she was little. "So," I said finally, as we turned onto our street, Birchwood Lane, "want to tell me what that was about?" Natasha was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "I just don't think it's a good idea." "The swimming lessons or Derek specifically?" Another long pause. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters. Derek has been nothing but good to our family. He loves Kaylee. He's been like a father to me since Dad died. If you have some problem with him, I think I deserve to know what it is."
She turned to look at me then, and there was something in her expression that made me ease up on the gas pedal. Not quite fear, but something close to it. Something that looked like she was weighing her words very carefully. "Just trust me on this one, okay? Please?" I wanted to push. Every instinct I had was telling me to push, to demand explanations, to point out that her reaction had been completely out of proportion to what was essentially a kind offer from a family member. But there was something in her voice, a quality I couldn't quite identify, that made me back down. "Okay," I said, "but we're gonna have to figure out something else for Kaylee. She's really upset about the swimming thing." "I know, and we will, I promise." We pulled into our driveway, a narrow strip of asphalt that led to our modest two-car garage. Our house was nothing special, a 3-bedroom ranch built in 1978 with cream-colored vinyl siding and forest green shutters that needed repainting. But it was ours, and it was home. The front yard was scattered with the first fallen leaves of the season, and our neighbor's cat, a fat orange tabby named Pumpkin, was sitting on our front steps like he owned the place. As we got out of the car, I caught Natasha looking back toward the direction we'd come from, toward my mother's house. Just for a second, but long enough for me to notice. "Natasha," I said as we walked toward the front door, "is there something about Derek that I don't know?" She stopped walking. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell me. I could see her struggling with something, some internal debate about whether to speak or stay silent. Then Kaylee bounded up the front steps, earbuds yanked out, apparently ready to continue her campaign for swimming lessons. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, completely oblivious to the tension between her parents. "What if I got a part-time job to pay for lessons myself? Ashley's sister works at that frozen yogurt place downtown, and she says they're hiring. I could work weekends and save up." The moment was broken. Whatever Natasha had been about to say disappeared as she shifted into mom mode, explaining why a part-time job wasn't practical with Kaylee's current course load and extracurricular activities. But as I unlocked the front door and ushered my family inside our warm, safe house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted during that dinner conversation. Something I couldn't quite name, but something that made me look at my wife differently, made me wonder what she knew that I didn't. And that's when I knew, with a certainty that settled in my stomach like a stone, that something was very, very wrong. I just had no idea how wrong, or how much it would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my marriage, and the man I'd trusted with my mother's happiness for 8 years. The truth would come out eventually. It always does. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to Natasha's carefully controlled breathing beside me, I had no idea that by the time I learned what she'd been protecting us from, everything would be different. Everything. The next few days settled back into our normal routine, but there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. It was like someone had moved all the furniture in our house just an inch to the left. Everything looked the same, but something felt off. Kaylee, true to her teenage nature, hadn't given up on the swimming lessons.
She'd moved from direct complaints to what I called strategic sighing, dramatic exhales whenever anyone mentioned pools, water, or summer activities. She'd also started leaving her laptop open to swim lesson websites with their bright photos of confident instructors and happy students mastering the butterfly stroke. "Look, Mom," she said on Tuesday morning over breakfast, sliding her laptop across the kitchen table so I could see the screen. "Aquatic's Excellent Swim School has a payment plan, only $49.99 a month for 6 months. That's like basically nothing." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Kaylee, $49.99 a month is $300 total. That's not nothing." "But it's spread out," she argued, stealing a piece of bacon from my plate. "And look at their success rate. 97% of students achieve their swimming goals within the first month." Natasha looked up from where she was packing her lunch for work. She'd been quieter than usual since Sunday, more thoughtful. I'd catch her staring out windows or pausing in the middle of conversations like she was listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. "Look, we'll figure something out, sweetheart," Natasha said, but her tone was distracted. "Maybe the community center really is a good option." Kaylee wrinkled her nose. "The community center smells like chlorine and old people." "All pools smell like chlorine," I pointed out. "That's how you know they're clean." "But the community center smells like chlorine and old people and that weird industrial soap they use in schools. Plus, their pool is like from the 1980s. It has those gross lane dividers that look like giant pool noodles, and the diving board is held together with duct tape." I had to admit, she had a point. The Riverside Heights Community Center was showing its age. The building itself was a relic from the town's more optimistic urban planning phase in the late 70s, all brown brick and tiny windows. The pool area hadn't been updated since Reagan was president. "Maybe we could look at other options," I suggested carefully, glancing at Natasha. "There might be private instructors who are less expensive than the swim schools." Natasha's hand tightened around her coffee mug. "I'd rather stick with established places, with proper oversight." "Oversight?" She looked confused. "It's swimming, not brain surgery."
Proper oversight is important for any kind of instruction, Natasha said firmly, especially for activities that involve close supervision. There was something in the way she said close supervision that made me pause. But before I could ask what she meant, Kaylee's phone buzzed with a text, and she was immediately absorbed in whatever teenage drama was unfolding in her social media feed. The rest of the week followed a similar pattern. Normal life, normal routines, but with this weird undercurrent of something unspoken. Natasha went to work at Crawford Marketing Solutions, where she managed social media accounts for local businesses. I continued my job at Riverside Elementary, teaching 4th grade and trying to convince 9-year-olds that fractions were actually fun. Kaylee attended her classes at Westfield Academy and came home with the usual complaints about homework, friend drama, and the injustice of having to wake up before noon. But there were little things that bothered me. The way Natasha would check her phone more frequently than usual, like she was expecting some kind of news. The way she'd gotten into the habit of making sure all our doors were locked before we went to bed, something she'd never been particularly concerned about before. The way she'd started parking in the garage instead of the driveway, even though it meant moving boxes and lawn equipment to make room for her car. On Thursday evening, we were cleaning up after dinner when my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen, along with the photo I'd taken of her last Christmas. She was wearing a red sweater with a reindeer on it and laughing at something Derek had said just out of frame. "Hi, Mom," I answered, motioning for Kaylee to start loading the dishwasher. "Hi, sweetheart. How's everyone doing? I feel like we barely got to talk on Sunday with all the swimming lesson excitement." I glanced at Natasha, who had gone very still again. She was standing at the sink, holding a plate under the running water, but she wasn't actually washing it. She was listening. "We're all good," I said, "just trying to figure out this swimming situation. Kaylee's pretty determined to learn before summer." "Oh, that's wonderful. You know, Derek was just saying yesterday how much he'd enjoyed teaching kids to swim back in college. He showed me some of his old photos from Thornfield University. He was quite the athlete back then, captain of the swim team his senior year." "Really? He never mentioned that." I found myself genuinely curious. Derek rarely talked about his college days beyond general mentions of studying business and working at the recreation center.
Oh yes, he was very accomplished. Swimming, diving, even water polo. He said some of his happiest memories were from those days at the pool, working with young people, helping them overcome their fear of the water. There was something in Mom's tone, a kind of wistful pride that made me think Derek had been talking about this quite a bit since Sunday's dinner. That's nice, Mom. I just hate to think of poor Kaylee missing out on something Derek could so easily help with, especially when we have that lovely pool just sitting there. I could feel Natasha's eyes on me, though when I turned to look at her, she quickly refocused on the dishes. "We're looking at other options," I said carefully. "The community center, maybe some of the local swim schools." Of course. I just thought, well, Derek mentioned that he'd be happy to provide references from his college days if that would make you feel more comfortable. His old supervisor at the recreation center, some of the families he worked with. He's very thorough about these things. That was interesting. Derek had never been one to oversell himself or push when someone said no. In fact, one of the things I'd always appreciated about him was how he respected boundaries. When Kaylee was younger and going through a phase where she didn't want anyone except me and Natasha to read her bedtime stories, Derek had backed off immediately, no questions asked. So why was he suddenly so invested in this swimming lesson idea? "I'll talk to Natasha about it," I heard myself saying, even though every instinct was telling me that was the wrong thing to say. Natasha's head snapped up and gave me a look that could have frozen boiling water. "Wonderful!" Mom sounded genuinely pleased. "I'm sure you two will work something out. You always do." After I hung up, the kitchen was quiet except for the sound of running water and the dishwasher's opening and closing. "You'll talk to me about what?" Natasha asked, her voice carefully neutral. "About Derek's offer. Mom says he has references from his college days, people who can vouch for his teaching abilities." Natasha turned off the water and dried her hands with deliberate, precise movements. "And that changes things how exactly?" "It doesn't necessarily change anything, but maybe it would help to understand why you're so opposed to the idea." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dish towel in her hands like it held answers to questions she hadn't figured out how to ask yet.
"Some things don't need to be explained," she said finally. "Sometimes no is enough." "But this isn't just about you," I said gently. "It's about Kaylee and our family and figuring out what's best for everyone." What's best for everyone is staying away from Derek's swimming lessons. Why? The question hung between us like a challenge. I could see Natasha weighing her options, deciding how much to say, how much to keep to herself. "Because I know things you don't know," she said finally. "What things?" But before she could answer, Kaylee bounced into the kitchen, earbuds dangling around her neck and her backpack slung over one shoulder. "I'm going to Madison's house to work on our history project," she announced. "Her mom's picking me up in 10 minutes. And just like that, the moment was broken. Natasha busied herself with putting away the clean dishes, and I helped Kaylee gather her books and supplies. But as I watched my wife move around our familiar kitchen, I realized that the ordinary world we'd built together, the comfortable routines, the easy trust, the assumption that we knew each other completely, was starting to crack around the edges. And I had no idea how deep those cracks went, or what I was going to find when they finally split wide open. The truth was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.